or evaluation, formal feedback, maybe heuristic assessment. But just an FYI that although Google is full of wonderful information about expert reviews, just be a little careful about the phrasing. This talk now, so we all understand what expert reviews are and can do. This talk now is about how to conduct them well. But the rest of my content assumes that you have done the foundational reading. So if you haven't, pause the YouTube video now and read these things. There's a great one from Nielsen Norman Group and a fantastic one from interactiondesign.org. They call it a cognitive walkthrough. It's a similar process. You'll have good fun working out maybe the differences and coming up with which one you prefer maybe. So start here. Start with the foundational literature. It's good. I'll stick these on my Twitter or something. You don't have to take pictures. There are also heuristic sets to guide you. Oh, sorry. Oh, God, which one? This one. Okay, there are also heuristic sets to guide you. I've not linked any here. We're going to come back to heuristics later. Okay, this talk then. This is the talk in the foundations track, so we're going to talk about foundational issues. We're going to talk about the core mistakes and maybe slips that I have had experience of through my practice task that I ran with members of this community. This talk is not a masterclass in conducting an expert review because it can't be. This is a life skill. It requires practice for the rest of your professional careers. What it will do, I hope, is give you some good ammunition, good pointers to really, really improve the quality of your outputs faster than you can by making these mistakes by yourself. Okay, practice task. So, as part of the work I do in my spare time, I ran a practice task with volunteer members of this community through the Discord. 20 self-selected people who were seeking jobs or were entry-level, people like yourselves perhaps, conducted the same analysis on the same game in the same format. Cool. So the rest of this talk from now is a meta-analysis of the reports that they provided. What are the common flaws and mistakes that they made compared to my hard-earned experience in doing the same? They had the same game, the same remit, and the same deliverable format. So hopefully this will be useful. All right. A bit about the game that I asked them to review. It's called Major Gun 2 War on Terror. And I'm going to just show you some screenshots now for a bit of context. It helps speed things up later. It's an on-rails arcade first-person shooter with a... so you can't move the character around, but you can move the camera from a fixed position. With a common gun upgrade game loop. It's a free-to-play game. You shoot baddies with guns to get currency, and then you spend that currency on better guns to shoot bigger baddies. Pretty common. In terms of the loop, it's very common across many different types of game. The controls, you use your left thumb to move and aim, and your right thumb to shoot the gun. You can also change to aim down sights. There's also a sniper mode in the game, which is in the tutorial. Just the fire button's still on the right, and you can still move with the thumb on the left here. And this is the menu. This is one of the menus for gun upgrades. The menu architecture, again, it's quite common among mobile games to have this bottom-mounted carousel where you can select kind of gross categories, which changes the whole middle of the screen. And then the top bar has got just passive information often about currencies and player progression. I'm sure you've all played games that look like this. This is the gun upgrade, and that's a tutorial prompt that says upgrade your gun. The main menu of the game has the different modes of the game in the center. So that, I don't know, what's that, like 9 or something, where it says sniper, shooting range, and boss. Those are the game modes. On the right-hand side is the selected mode, the currently selected mode, some details about it, what sort of gunpowder you need. It's got that bar at the top with the currencies, and on the left-hand side is some metagame information. So this is about progression and unlocking stuff, chests and stuff. Okay. A little further into the game, this particular game, you unlock some extra stuff. At the bottom there, we've got some consumables, so you can heal yourself and other junk. There's objectives at the top that change depending on the game mode, and a health bar top left, and gun switching on top right. Okay, that was a whirlwind tour, but it's not imperative to know the game for the rest of the talk, but it's useful. Why this game in particular? Why did I choose this out of all the ones I could have? In my opinion, the core controls of this game are pretty standard fare. There's only so much you can do with an on-rails arcade shooter. But there are some really interesting issues, in my opinion, that are a bit deeper than that. So things about metagame comprehension, how the player progresses, how they will understand it, how the game communicates that to the player. Monetization model, what the player can buy, how clarified that is. In-game store usability, the UI in general, the design and structure. There's some breaks from best practice. And also there's some really interesting scenarios in gameplay, feedback during gameplay, where maybe the game state and the failure state isn't clear. So in short, I think it's a really interesting game to review. It's a good game, it's a great game, but has some interesting UX issues to dig from. All right. Skipping to the end of this task that I ran with these 20 people, I got some fantastic feedback from the individuals that took it, and at least 6 of the participants, I haven't spoken to them all, have subsequently secured jobs in gamesUR, so go you. All right. Okay, the rest of my talk now is in the meat of it. We know what an expert review is, we know what I did and what I'm going to present today, and I've grouped the rest of my findings in these 5 sections. These 5 sections follow along with, roughly, the actual process of undertaking an expert review. So when you sit down on a Saturday morning or whatever, I'm going to write an expert review today, this is the 5 steps-ish you're going to take. And the rest of my talk is organised by these, okay? Starting with setting the scope and context. Okay. Wrong way. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do before we sit down is not play the game, but think about why we're here. Think about what we're going to do and what the development team need. The first of the common flaws in these reports that were delivered is not considering enough the objectives of the study. In a commercial setting, the reviews that you provide are never disconnected from the realities of game development that day. You need to know what the team is up to. You need to know what has potential scope for change. You cannot run research for the sake of it. In my practice task, I gave some fake information from the developer that gave a bit of context for why they were proposing this study. It said, and I quote, "Our game isn't meeting key financial and retention projections. Can you help us do something about that?" Yet, none of the reviews that were submitted focused on metagame comprehension, retention, or otherwise. You must, first of all, agree what you're here for. What is this expert review designed to do? So as our first lesson, professional valuations can't be disconnected from the studio's needs. Think, before you begin, what focus adds most meaningful value? Now, this is very difficult in a practice setting, of course, right? But you can imagine that game studios want to make players play for longer and pay more money and what have you, and understand the game better. Okay. Second, before we begin, it is imperative that we assess the whole game. Many of the reports that were delivered to me omitted a huge swathe of the game. Some of them completely omitted core UI. Some of them didn't look at the store, didn't look at the gun upgrade screen. Some of them didn't look at gameplay. There were reports that did not look at the gameplay itself and just the UI in the game. So I can't be more clear. The game is not just the shooty bits or the tutorial bits or the prompts or the onboarding. It is everything, a holistic whole. And that is the remit of an expert analysis. If you can't assess the whole game because you don't have time or what have you, do so constructively and deliberately and highlight the parts that you've not looked at. I didn't look past 1 hour or what have you, but we should. Our objective is to look at the whole thing. Every major screen and every core mechanic gets a mention in the report, even if it's to say, I didn't look at it, or for these reasons I think it's okay. Every screen and every major mechanic gets a mention. Okay. Again, before we begin, and I've talked already about the remit of games user research, is to practice this voice that games user research is designed to occupy. What are we here for? Games user research's role is to remain creatively impartial, in my opinion, to actualize the designer's vision, not to impart our own. So here's what not to do, and these are quotes from the individual reports, anonymized if anyone's watching that submitted a report. Things like saying, this game is unique and interesting, or that the developers should add more narrative to make it better, or that they should change the mechanics to add a red outline around all of the characters to make it easier to find them, or that the difficulty was too high, or that the game was repetitive or easy. These are these are all statements about players' affect, their emotions, how they may respond to this content, and they are fundamentally outside the scope of an expert analysis method. We can talk about these things as games user researchers, but not with this method, not without player data to back it up. In an expert review then, you can make assertions about things like this: player perception, how players see and hear things, because you're expert in that. Cognition, how players learn, how they read, information architecture and the impact thereof, players' existing mental models or how they're constructed, because you're experts in that. And we can think about player behaviour, how their hands work, how their eyes work, etc., and interaction design in general, because you're experts in that. This is the remit of an expert analysis. So, if you're tempted, don't be, to talk about things like fun factor, difficulty, pacing, engagement, value for money, monetization, likelihood to churn, likelihood of deletion, whether players will love it or not. This is not the method that will give us that data. Nobody wants fashion advice from their dentist. You're trusted as the user researcher to only weigh in on decisions that you have the remit for, and sometimes that means controlling your own remit and desire to talk about the cool, how fun the game might be. And as a summary of this first section about thinking before we begin, we not only have to decide these things in advance, but we have to communicate these forward to the developers. Because developers, broadly speaking, may or may not have low maturity in UX and not really understand the limitations necessarily that we're talking about here. So we have to communicate these forward, not just abide by them, but communicate them to the development team. Don't assume everyone understands your MO or your remit. Include it in your report. Start your reports with an explainer on the objectives and limitations of the study. Your report will at some point have to stand by itself. You will not be there to present it to a development team. Okay, first stage done. We've understood what we're here for, what we're going to do, what we're going to cover, what we're not going to talk about. Now it's time to play the game and find some issues. Let's talk about heuristics. Heuristics are rules of thumb. I'm sure you're already familiar. There are academically constructed sets that to try to define possible game design flaws or possible interaction design flaws. There are very many out there. I'm sure there's at least 10. I'm sure you could all... we could easily do another hour on heuristics, by the way, so this will be a high-level stuff. Several of the reports listed... Well, let's go with this one first. Several of these heuristic sets stray into game design. If you follow those heuristics, they will change the game, which we're not here to do. Second of all, several of the reports listed broken heuristics as a reason to change something. Hey, you didn't follow Rule 35, better change that. Heuristics are not a checklist. They are not rules that can't be broken. In fact, there are just as many reasons to break heuristics as there are to follow them. If we follow all the heuristics, the game probably won't be fun. We have to generate friction. That's what we're here for. We have to generate deliberate friction. So, firstly, they're not a checklist, and secondly, they're not a stick to beat developers with. They're not used in game development. Only we talk about heuristics. They've got their own sets of, I'm sure, of cool game design heuristics. They're useful as a tool to help build a mental model, but they are not a stick to beat developers with. Learn from heuristics, but don't use them like a checklist. Many simply won't apply. You have to practice parsing out the game design intent. Which heuristics are being deliberately broken? You have to practice parsing that out from the game itself. Not coming from heuristics forward, but from the game backwards. Okay, so we're playing the game now. We're writing down issues as we go. We're playing through the game, starting with the onboarding. One of the commonalities in the reports was to kind of a failure to consider the impact of time. It's tempting as you're writing down notes to just be like, oh, that's an issue, that's an issue, that's an issue. And to not consider that our brains aren't computers. We don't remember everything we see. We're actually, we're pretty squishy. Brains aren't all that great at remembering stuff, right? So we have to consider the impact of time. The issues presented in the reports, post or this play process, often underestimated players' ability to work things out from feedback, saying things like such and such a thing isn't clear, when there's feedback later in the game design to clarify that through use. And they simultaneously overestimated players' ability to remember everything they're told. So if detail is only presented in a text box once, that's maybe not good enough. So just a pointer. Players will make mistakes. Players won't understand everything. That doesn't have to be corrected immediately. It's not necessarily an issue. And we're going to come back to this when we talk about tutorials in a minute. Negative experiences can lead to positive changes in player behaviour. Doing something wrong and being punished for it briefly means you don't do that again. That's a positive change that hasn't required some explicit tutorialization. Okay. Next up, accuracy. Many examples of the reports contained things that weren't true. Weird, huh? They incorrectly asserted how mechanics worked, and they suggested fixes that describe the actual implementation. This is a point about thoroughness. You have to go through and double check that your issues are real. It's not simply enough to walk through the game once. You have to go through multiple times, especially if they're high priority issues. You heard Randy upstairs saying that we are impactful as a discipline. All of these reports are taken seriously. And if you tell developers things that aren't true, you're undermining your credibility. Okay. Here's the sticky one, monetization. This is a free-to-play game, and I deliberately chose it to make sure that the reviewers were exposed to issues around monetization. Let's start at the beginning. Game development is a business. It pays your salary, probably, will do. It is therefore neglectful to omit from the review the ways that the game will make money. We have to find a way to expert review around the topic of monetization, even though monetization is closely related to how players feel about a game. If they don't enjoy it, they're not going to pay for it. So how do we talk about this? Many of the reviews that were submitted completely omitted looking at the in-game store, the way the players spend money, the transaction process. Absolutely essential for this game returning the money that was spent in making it. It's free to play. You must look at the way that the game makes money as a high priority. Secondly, the reports contain phrases like this. It's dangerous when games start to push players to use real money. Players shouldn't be, or words to the effect of, players shouldn't be limited by in-game currency. The monetization system causes frustration. The game is pay to play. It's a digital gun marketplace. The game is pay to win. These were inclusions. These are direct quotes, anonymized, of course. The Games User Research book has a chapter on heuristics. I don't really want to call it out directly, but it does. Then there are other voices that say games shouldn't be pay to win. This doesn't gel with the most popular games in the world having pay to win aspects, so already that's kind of not true. But even if you want to argue with this, then that's fine. Expert reviews are not the vehicle with which to do it. It will undermine your credibility with the game development team if you start telling them that they're not going to make money, or they shouldn't make money this way, or that you somehow know how to design a game model better than them. This is not the vehicle to make those assertions. Exploration of monetization is paramount, but you have to remain objective, remembering if game development is a business that pays your salary. Okay, where are we at? We're at stage 3. We've decided what to do, we've played the game and got ourselves some issues, we've written down, done a cognitive walkthrough, following the guides I posted at the start of the talk. We're now pausing and prioritizing those issues we've already written. So going back through them again, as I suggested, is necessary, and starting to think about which ones are most important. Which ones get fixed today, as opposed to next week, as opposed to next month. It is rare for a usability issue to be atomic. If there's an issue with an understandability of something, or the usability of a particular user interface, that is an issue with the game, of course, but it has ramifications often beyond that UI or that mechanic. It is necessary, therefore, to not only go through the game twice, but also go through your issues twice, to find information about how these issues you've have found intersect with each other. I'll pull out a particular example from this game as I think it's interesting. I don't want to have this talk rely on a knowledge of this game. But one issue in this particular game is that the post-game screen, which is after you complete a level, shoot all the baddies and you win, it contained some confusing language about stars, and many of the reviewers picked up about this. What are stars? How do I earn them? How do I get 3? Is 1 better than 3? What do they do after I get them? There are lots of potential questions as a result of the interface being unclear. People found that. Secondly, separate issue, the animation for earning star chests, which is in the in the map screen that I showed you earlier with those game modes, that there's a little animation there that shows how many stars you got rolling into the star chest. But it's really fast and it's super easy to miss, and you're a bit disconnected from the end of the previous level. So there's another issue here about what was that animation? That was fast, that was too quick. So we've got 2 separate issues about one mechanic that individually sound like, okay, well that's fine, I guess people work it out. But if you put them together, if you start to combine related and intersected issues, we're talking about the clarity of the entire metagame being completely unclear to players. It's got issues along the whole stars progression meta system, which unless you go back and find these commonalities, may be overlooked. So, read back through your issues. Parse them for commonalities on relatedness to find if there is a larger issue. It's essential as part of your process. Prioritization then. Prioritization is among the most important part of the deliverable that the expert review provides. What is the most important thing that we need to fix next or focus on next? It's fantastic to find issues. It's wonderful to be thorough, but prioritization is taken very seriously. If someone says it's a high priority issue, if you say this is a high priority issue, maybe the team works late to fix it. Maybe the whole rest of the development schedule changes as a result. Prioritization is paramount. We could easily do another hour on prioritization processes, frankly. In fact, probably more than that. The resource I provided to the junior and job seekers that provided this report was one by User Focus. It's called the User Focus Prioritization Tree. And I know that that's used inside commercial games user research studios to guide prioritization. So I thoroughly encourage you to use it. But even if you want to make up your own prioritization rules or it's not good enough for you, this User Focus, this tree, make prioritization rules and stick to them and explain the rules in your report. Much like doing math problems at school, it's useful to show you're working. Show the way your thought process that says this is a high versus this is a medium issue. Allow the developers to understand for themselves why something is so important, such that they can change the nature of their development. If it's useful to you, as just a thought process, imagine that the highest priority issues that you provide means a team stay late, right? There's a human cost to having a high prior. And some of the reviews had a lot of high priority issues, which, we could do another hour on this. Let's not. Out of interest, the user focus thing is not perfect. As an example of it not being perfect, and it doesn't need to be. It's a high level idea. You look it up. It's a cool tool, but it doesn't consider things like monetization. So as another rule, you'll have to add any issue that prevents players confidently transacting with the game or permits use of a real-world currency analog, things like the grenades you can buy for real-world money in the game, is immediately a high-priority issue, regardless of wherever it falls on this tree or any other means. So, yeah, this is among the things that need practice as a junior games user researcher, finding these modifiers that change prioritization. Okay. Where are we? We've prioritized our issues and we've parsed them to make sure we have a true understanding of what the problems are in the game. Now we're going to try and communicate those forward to the development team. Take my notes and turn them into something I can show people. Several of the reports, starting a bit with the basics here, several of the reports erred on the side of a patronizing tone. Communicating through anyone that sent, had a big long email chain, and we use email a lot these days. We know that writing is tough. Maintaining tone and professionalism is tough, and it's really easy for things to get misunderstood in text, right? So you have to be really careful to manage your tone in these reports, and saying things like that things felt shallow or meaningless, excessively emotive words, using things like Skinner boxes, super loaded as a term, or being a bit kind of curt and saying things like fixed weapon progression. You have to watch your tone. and ensure you're maintaining professionalism. And in the same sense, yep, a few of the reports contain these things I'm going to call threat statements. Things like, well, exactly this. Such and such an issue will irritate the player and they're going to delete your game. Players will get confused and they're going to uninstall your thing. No, they won't. They absolutely won't. This isn't how players work. So first of all, no, they won't. Secondly, this is a perfect example of the sort of information that you shouldn't include. This is an assertion about players' emotion that you have absolutely no, an expert review has no objectivity to provide. Third of all, though, don't just not do it, but third of all, games user research is about building confidence in development teams. And it's about thinking about them actually as people in an empathetic transaction with the development team, sharing your knowledge, making the game better. Game developers, as you'll see as you go through your careers, they live with this fear that the thing they're making is not going to succeed. That the thing that they're making is going to not do that well, and maybe I won't have a job, right? Let's not talk about the games industry at large, but statements like this not only aren't helpful to this project, but they're not helpful to the mental health of the developers you're working with. They don't need more worries, they need your assistance. So watch your tone. Yeah. Okay. A common phrase among many of the write-ups of these issues was words to the effect of, such and such a feature is not explained. This thing is not explained. This isn't clear to the player. If games were to explain every possible thing to the player with a prompt, it would be a very poor experience. Games user research's voice, well, here's some examples. Let's go through these first. The game doesn't introduce you to energy, which is that thing on the top bar, if you recall from the screenshot, or in-game currency. We have to demonstrate to players that the enemies will shoot at us. The power level of the guns is never really explained on the UI. Consider introducing all resources and variously the consumables as well. Introducing all of these things to a player sounds like a terrible experience. Nobody wants more tutorial content, and that's, broadly speaking, in my opinion, not the voice of games user research. We're not here to add more tutorials. In fact, ideally, we should be taking away the tutorials because we feel confident not having them. That's one of the sources of confidence we can provide. So then, if we're not just going to tell players things, tell them this, tell them that, how do we teach people stuff? We could easily do another hour on teaching people stuff, but let's just cover the way I see this, just as a seed of a starter. 3 different ways of teaching people things. 1, familiarity. The player already knows that thing. They just need to apply that mental model to the thing they're looking at. You don't teach people how to use a telephone, right? They have a telephone icon. This is like symbolism and icons. They know this from life, or they know this from other games. So we can make things more familiar. That would help. We don't need to introduce people to stuff. Discoverability. People learn by messing around with stuff, trial and error. By using it and seeing, using this toy or this thing until some feedback pops out like, oh, that's a thing. We can encourage that. And actually, you've got lots of information in your heads about how to do that really well. We can also strive for internal consistency such that people recognize, oh, that's a pink thing. There was a pink thing over there too. I wonder if, right? Only if those 2 things fail, only then, as a way of thinking about this. Perhaps only if these 2 things fail, then we should be like, this is a pink thing, and it does a thing, and you should click it sometime. Only do we need explicit tutorialization if it's the last resort. Now, maybe that's not always true, and you make up your own mind, but maybe this is a useful way to think about how to teach players. As a lesson here, then, you're an expert in how players think. Help the studio implement a system. Help them design a game that helps players think in the right way. Advocating for more tutorials is not our job. It's too easy. You need to work harder than that. Okay. Psychobabble. Many of the reports contained, jargon from psychology. And it's tempting when faced with a complex subject to try and either talk about it in ways that are pretty cool, apply it to the things you know, or to try and impress the developers with your awesome psychology knowledge. But that's not what we're here for. We're not here to sound smart. We're here to make games better. So whilst it's necessary as part of your objectivity to say, I know this thing I'm talking about because of these reasons and this psychology, leave the jargon at home. So things like alternative choice, Skinner box, talking about motivations, unless it's really benefiting the team, leave it at home. Okay. Multimedia reporting. We could easily do another hour on how to write reports, but you should probably not write 10,000 words on every issue. Try and use other means of communicating information. Again, this is a source. This is something you ought to be practicing. How can you communicate information better visually, quickly, more effectively, more understandably, without using jargon? By using mock-ups, diagrams, flowcharts, imperative, minimizing text, and yet not sacrificing understandability. Okay. As part of my report process, I allowed the reviewers to provide suggestions. Now, this is a hot subject in games user research, whether or not we should be providing design suggestions. I'm not going into that right now. But what I can talk about briefly is that suggestions are real dangerous because none of you and I am not an ideas person. We're not designers. We should let designers design. We're researchers. We should assess. Providing suggestions is a loaded and difficult thing to do, but broadly speaking, design alternatives are easy. It is easy to find another way to do something. There's loads of them, but actually improving design is hard. Why is your design better than that design? Understand the trade-offs. Why use a grid instead of a list? Talk to me about the trade-offs, and if you don't think the trade-offs are worth it, that's your argument. That's where your suggestions come in, is communicate why you think your set of trade-offs are better than the implemented set of trade-offs. You must ask yourself about all of these possible consequences, all of these possible trade-offs. How do they manifest in the game experience? This is one of the reports said, I've got an issue with the perceptibility of the enemies in the game. They're quite small and far away. There's a sniper mechanic, so sometimes you have to zoom, but they're quite small sometimes. So we should add a contrasting outline for the hostages that can be seen through enemies. Sorry, yeah, this is hostages. They're people you shouldn't shoot. So it's like a Left 4 Dead style outline around the character so they can be seen through walls and stuff, I guess, right? That's cool. That fixes a problem, but then completely changes how the game works, completely changes everything about how difficult it is, where the fun comes from, where the friction comes from. The trade-off, I think players might accidentally shoot hostages sometimes, has been made deliberately. So if you don't agree with it, cool. This is a cool vehicle to change that, but you have to be persuasive. Every design alternative comes with pros and cons. You need to practice thinking about them. A good way of doing this is to play lots of games. Cool, easy homework. But you need to study games. You need to actually play games with this UX hat on and say, I understand, parse through it for deliberate choices. A cool way of doing this is to play lots of games from the same genre because they face the same challenges. Taking Battle Royale as an example of a genre that has major competitors in the space right now, they're facing the same challenges, things about interplayer communication and radial design and state changes and maps. You can compare differing solutions to practice this art of the trade-off and to find that voice within yourself and say, I understand why this design is different, maybe better, maybe not, than another. Okay. All right. Getting there. Good practice. How are we doing on time? Good practice. So expert reviews are a good vehicle for giving good practice, for telling developers when they do something well. That's cool. But they often end in sort of platitudes like, good practice, there's a tutorial. Good practice, game's fun. Or the controls are fine. And it's not surprising because genuinely good practice stuff is super hard to do. And again, this takes lots of practice. You're trying to parse through the game to find, as one indication of a good practice that you could, kind of hat you can wear is, try to find violated heuristics that lead to better learnability, or lead to a positive scenario, or lead to behavioral change. Because that's a risk. The developer took a risk by breaking the best practice or breaking the heuristic and saying, nah, actually, I think I prefer the outcome of this broken heuristic than not. And the best write-up of a good practice issue should not be specific to that one scenario, but in an ideal world, allow the developer to abstract from that learning and say, and either deliver confidence or knowledge to say, oh, I can take that thing, that confidence, that understanding about breaking that heuristic, and apply it to these other places in the game now, and and make the whole game better as a result of finding this good practice in one area, trying to change a bit the way that they think. Okay. Organising the report. Thank you. So, we're at the last stage now, almost out the door. We've got our issues written up in a way that's beautifully understandable, minimal, multimedia, and now our job is to organise them into a report format, into a deliverable. Many of the reports that were delivered as part of this practice task were just a 20-page list of issues from start to finish, just maybe a bit of sorting, but just a 20-page unstructured list. I put a limit on it of 20 pages, so one could see why you would want to fill all 20 pages up with issues. But a big old bucket of issues does not help the development team. As an example of how I approach this, find your own way, again, practice. When I do this, I aim for 3 to 5 logical sections of the report. So 3 to 5 titles, where you've grouped the issues deliberately to help the team parse through it and distribute those sections out to members of their team. You could, yeah. There's 2 approaches to ordering issues within those sections. 1, if those issues are applicable to wide swathes of the game, all gameplay, all UI, all menus, you should order them by priority, highest priority first. If the issues you present are specific to a scenario, or you've got a game that's very linear, so that things change over time, and each scenario is very different to the next, I would sort them by time. So start going in time order. So hopefully that, by all means practice, come up with your own rules, prove me wrong, but this is how I do it. Hopefully it's a good starter. We talked already about expert analysis being a good vehicle for your expertise, and it's good practice to talk about what happens next. So you're a researcher, you know research methods, you've chosen to run an expert review perhaps. So expert reviews can be good to talk about what's next, but not just suggesting a method, not just run a playtest or whatever, but we need to focus on this, we need this length of play, we need this type of player. You can formalize and help developers understand the next method and why to help improve research literacy. And the very last thing on the list is an executive summary, which I requested as part of the task. The last thing we write is the summary of it all. Begin your report with a summary of the highest priority findings. So you can do just your mids, just your highs, decide what you think, decide the story you want to tell. Ideally on 1 slide or maybe 2 if it's lots and lots of issues. And we're writing this last because we have to summarize our findings at a high level and ensure that it tells the story of the rest of the report. So even if you just look at this one page, I know roughly what the rest of the report is going to do. So it comes first, but it's written last. All right, cool. Let's summarize this near the end. Expert analyses are a fantastic tool, but are high stakes. It's easy to completely undermine your relationship with the development team through the nature of poor or unstructured communication or otherwise, or to inject bad data that can have terrible ramifications. As a next step, if you want to do more of these, cool. Do the reading on the process that I shared at the start of the slides. There's some fantastic information out there about expert reviews and how to conduct them for mainstream UX, and there's lots of life lessons you can learn about how games are different. Familiarise yourself with the voice of gamesUR research. Go listen to Randy's talk again, and then seek deliberate practice. So I'll be running this practice task again if people want to be involved. And indeed, the mentorship scheme, this is a potential good opportunity to run an expert review yourself and get maybe feedback from a mentor, or indeed, if you can, come to Jess, Bree, and Hannah's talk later about working with development teams directly to maybe provide an expert review to them. As they're quite easy to turn around. Okay, thank you very much. It was perfect. I did okay on time? Yep. Yes. There's a lot of content. I think there's time for questions, or maybe a few. Yeah, go ahead.
Anyone have questions? Okay.
Yes, hello, my name is Gabriel. I have
Hey.
a question about monetization.
Yes.
You said it's really risky to talk about it, but we should talk about it.
Yes.
Do you have any examples of how would be a good way to approach that in an expert analysis?
This is about remit. So I think that's, I'm not going to be able to scroll to it quickly, but that slide earlier about controlling what you talk about. We can talk about perception, affordance, mental models, understandability and usability of an interface, of a system. Which monetization is just anything to do with currency or spending money. Any mechanic that's relevant to that has usability and learnability traits. It's just a lens on only those things that do with money. So with an expert review perspective, I'm not talking about games user research at large here. It is risky but necessary to talk about monetization. And it's more imperative than almost any other topic to control your remit. But yeah, it's those same factors. Monetization is big and scary, but it's just an interaction with the system. It just now has dollar coins or whatever on it. It's exactly the same lens. It's just a big and scary and potentially influential changes that can be made. So yeah, just maintain that remit. Understandability, learnability, and communicate that forward to the team. Hey, I know you're worried about your biz model. I know you're concerned that players won't pay for stuff. That's cool, and we'll deal with that down the line. Like we've got other methods that can help with that. Right now, this expert review is focused on usability and learnability of what you've already implemented in the game, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But yeah, it's big and scary though, isn't it? Talking about money.
This is really great. And I know your focus was expert reviews, but I feel like this is applicable to a lot of different types of reports and methods. I'm curious about what are your how do you practice feedback to someone? I see things like don't have a patronizing tone, and sometimes I want to tell my team this sounds really patronizing, but how do I give that to them so they feel empowered rather than critical?
Sure. Thanks. Such a good question. We're still learning too about how to do this well. I mean, learning never changes. We're always doing it. For me, I think it's important to have a decent time distance between the delivery of the report and when you're giving the feedback. First of all, certainly not waiting when the report is too hot. People are still, they're still worried about the things that they said, and they are still a bit close to maybe to the findings. So giving a bit of time is important. There is a podcast called Mixed Methods Podcast, which I'm sure you have heard of, which has an episode on giving feedback in groups. That's specifically to inform interview technique improvement. But I propose that the same format could be used to improve expert analyses too. So that's actually going back through the reports in a group setting, or in a meeting, and in a not jovial way, but in a more, the tone is different, right? Yeah, it's a friendly space. And yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Feedback is tough. On the plus side, it feels really good. Doing these 20 reviews has taught me so much about my own processes. So I think there's a lot to be garnered as a mentor from this process too. So those of you that are seniors in the room, do sign up to the mentorship scheme, because you get so much out of it. And maybe we can all do a talk next year about how to give that feedback. That would be wicked cool. Okay.
Hi, my name is Salim.
Hey, where are you? Oh, hey.
In the heuristic assessment, what would you say are some tips to actually reduce jargon in these kind of reports, since we can get heavy-handed sometimes in our terms when reviewing UI and mechanics?
Yeah. So first of all, okay, lots of approaches. First of all, trying to use the game language, trying to use the language of the developers themselves. They've got, there's language in the game which you should try and reuse. So making sure you're using the official names of mechanics and features and that sort of thing. And you're familiar with game nomenclature in general. There's a video game style guide. Is it called that? The one that, there's a video game, I think if you search video game style guide, Damn, I wish I'd prepped to know what that's really called. If there's a PDF online, it's free. It's a massive dictionary, a glossary of terms that are used in game development to try and give you the ammunition, like essentially the mental shortcuts or the linguistic shortcuts to get to the topics you want to really fast and make yourself really understandable. So that's getting to your point quickly. In terms of making the point itself, I guess you just need to constantly evaluate why do I need to talk about Skinner boxes or the jargon? Why do I feel the need to do that? Maybe there's another way of understanding it. Another way of communicating that to the development team. A much underused tool here is to ask questions. Or in your report, ask the team a question. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to make assertive statements. It can be enough just to get the development team to ask the right question of themselves. So the mental model I have for this is I imagine the boardroom and all the decision makers are in the room. What's the one question I write on the whiteboard and point at until they answer? That's the question that ends at the expert review. So you don't necessarily have to make assertive statements that prove your worth or have all the answers. Just asking better questions can be enough. Okay. Are we done? No more time? Thank you very much, everyone. I'm around all day if you want to come chat.
When you say that, what does
All right,
that
good
mean?
to go?
Seniors and juniors? When you say
All
that,
right.
what does that mean?
People who've been in the industry a long time versus people who haven't.
Oh, okay.
It's about 50-50.
Okay, because I've heard y'all
Not
say
all in.
juniors and seniors a lot, and I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense. Okay.
All right, folks. Hello. Thank you for coming. My name is James Berg. I'm a senior researcher at EA. I am going to be moderating our panel of excellent industry veterans. So a lot of you folks hopefully just saw Seb's excellent talk. He filled your brain with a lot of knowledge. And now is your chance to ask for a different perspective on some of that stuff or to get more information from various folks. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce ourselves. We'll start with Melissa Boone.
All right. My name is Melissa Boone, and I am a research manager at Xbox Research.
I'm Matt Strite, and I'm the Senior Manager of UX Research at Scopely.
Are we just doing name and title? No, nothing?
Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan Dankoff, Senior Manager at Warner Brothers.
Keishana Gray, Gray. It's EY on the screen. I'm assistant professor.
That's
it's
my
okay.
bad.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
All right. So let's expand on that a little bit. So tell us a little bit about like what you actually do, because I don't think a lot of people understand what the various folks here do. Just very quickly.
Yeah, sure. So I manage research across a variety of different areas. So in Minecraft, I also work in accessibility research, diversity and inclusion research, and also Mixer and game streaming. So a couple of different areas.
One or two things.
So I oversee the team that does research on all of our mobile games, as well as a lot of work on kind of the GM and exec strategy level to get more buy-in throughout the company.
Same. Yeah, no, I have it. I work with a team. We're sort of distributed, half of us in Montreal, half of us in Seattle, and we work on all the games under Warner Brothers umbrella, and then some of the games that we distribute, some of the games that we publish, some of the games that we develop internally, and then I sort of work a little bit on some games, but mostly sort of moving up into more management role.
And I guess I'm a team of one. So, I research experiences of women and people of color in online gaming environments and online contexts.
All right. So we've got a couple pre-selected questions because a lot of these are the most common questions we get. For folks that have seen this, actually, how many folks here are in the GERD Discord already? Okay, most of you. If you do not know what I'm talking about, go to grux.org, grux.org, find the Discord. If you can't find the Discord and you want to get into research, you should rethink your career path. Okay. Join the Discord because there's basically a channel that is this panel, but a crap load of industry veterans and a lot of new folks that are looking for more information. So make sure to check that out. And there's a lot of other resources on that site as well.
It's basically this panel forever.
Yes.
365.
Yes. There was some questions of like, do we actually need this panel? And I'm like, well, I can plug the Discord. They're like, okay, good enough. That's a good enough reason for you to do this.
It's Discord Live.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh.
And we got one new voice because you're definitely not in our Discord yet.
Not at all.
Yeah. All right. So starting questions, we're going to ask for fairly brief answers. And then if you folks need more in-depth answers from my panelists, please ask follow-up questions. So what advice do you have for getting into the industry? We'll just go right to left. Melissa.
So my advice is always networking, meeting people. I mean, obviously that's one of the big reasons for coming to a conference like this. But I think the best advice I can give is how to do that, which is just build relationships with people. Talk, tell them what you do, ask what they do. It's really building relationships for the future.
Okay. And for folks that are watching on the live stream and you aren't here, sucks to be you. That's too bad. Come next year because you want to meet and network like that. It's really, really important. Matt?
Yeah, I think doing some work that's connected, even if only tangentially, and the networking part and just kind of staying on things. Like jobs open very kind of intermittently, and if you reach out to someone and they're like, I don't have anything right now, it doesn't mean a month from now or 6 months from now they won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing, just to go one level deeper, on top of like the networking and the Discord, there's a lot of group interaction, but I find that the ones that I've had most valuable interactions with is after some sort of good group interaction, they'll reach out to you personally and you'll make some sort of connection. And I mean, most of us know one another and we'll ask around and we'll talk about people. It's, how human beings work. And so every once in a while, I'll see that there's an opening for a junior, somebody I know, and then I send your name along with a personal recommendation for me, it'll mean a little bit more, right? And so making sure to have some sort of human level connection to another person can be really helpful if you're trying to get a job.
And I would question your life decisions if you really wanted to get into the industry. I would ask you why. Not being anti-industry or anything at all, but I'm just thinking about all the issues and problems that are happening, like around, labor issues, contract issues, having a precarious reality, being like let go at will. So there are a lot of things I think you need to consider about what your livelihood might be, what the quality of life might be, and really thinking if that's like the path for you. And also I think networking could let you see the different kinds of avenues and paths that you could take. Academia, is another option.
So pitch that for us. Pitch academia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got my PhD it's not computer science, not engineer, it's not even traditional STEM at all. So my degree was in more of a social justice context. Yes, social justice warrior. I think I literally got a PhD in that. Here come the trolls. That's okay. But what I did, I had a concentration in media, technology, and culture. So I examined, our mediated industries. I examined communication structures and communicative practices through a justice lens. And so a lot of folks thought it was weird for me to do that, but I'm like, hey, I have an interest here. This was back, I started my research back in 2005 and 2007. So it was a lot of stuff that there were some conversations that weren't being had. So folks like me, different, marginalized folks, there are some conversations that we weren't a part of. So I used my degree to do that, to inform, different industry folks, hey, this is what's happening to them in these spaces. So it's more of a synergistic kind of relationship where you can work intimately with these amazing folks and you can still be a part of that. You can still get invited to these kind of industries, but I keep my job at the end of the day. Let's say if I mess up on Twitter, I'm not just fired or let go. I'm at a union house, UIC has a union, so I'm protected. So I look at things that are larger than that, so at the end of the day, I can pay my bills too. Yeah.
All right, great. All right, so second question. What traits, attributes, and/or experiences do you think are most important for games researchers?
So I say creativity and persuasion. So you need to be able to be creative in the research that you do. A lot of times there's very short time periods in which to do research, but also persuasion, because you can do the best research in the world, but if you can't convince people to believe it or to believe you, then it's not worth anything.
Matt?
Yeah, I'd agree with both of those, and also say just an attention to detail. You can try and learn process, but if you lack that attention to detail and you're just randomly going to miss things in different spots every time, that's just really hard to actually do good science and to have anyone be able to kind of be a safety net or stay on top of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't particularly think there's a single trait or attribute. I think different teams, different organizations, different places always are looking for a different fit. They're looking to either, if I've already got somebody who's super creative and really fun and really persuasive, I probably don't necessarily need a second one right away. And so I'm looking more at a team composition and a structure and sort of a fabric of a research team that is more effective as a group. And so try to understand, who you're working with, who your boss is going to be, who the other colleagues are, and how do you mesh into there. It's a very cop-out answer because I'm not saying a single trait, but I feel like there's never one thing where I'm like, that's the one.
Do you want to talk about your T?
Is that now?
T-shape? Sure.
Right. And then one of the other things that I talk about often is the T model, which some people might be familiar with, where most people, you have sort of a breadth of knowledge and experience and a very deep, a depth in a certain field. And that also depends on the organization, right? And so I think certainly the smaller the organization, the broader a T you're going to want to be. The larger the organization, I guess that's been my assumption, but she told me I was wrong very recently. But some places are looking for a very deep T, right? They're looking for somebody who has masterful knowledge in one skill set or one methodology. And those things, it's trying to figure out what is the problem that you're trying to solve for the hiring manager, and how can I sell the shape of my T to them so that I look like the right candidate for that particular job. And those skill sets, a point of view of that as skill sets is sort of something more holistic than what's the one, should I know how to use SPSS? It's not usually the right answer in my opinion. It's more, are they looking for somebody who's good at SPSS but also good at these other 9 things? Or are they looking at somebody who's really good at SPSS? And having that level of understanding of what you have to offer and what they're looking for, I think is much more likely to be successful as you would try to enter the job market.
And I would say have the courage to do something different. So let's say if you're a part of a team and you see something, if you have a bright idea, be courageous enough to like say that, even if it goes against what the senior folks may have been doing or what's been there all the time. Now, don't try to go and reinvent the wheel. And we heard an amazing talk earlier to make sure that you curate the knowledge first before you try to come and reinvent the wheel, but also still have the courage, you know, to kind of like push the envelope some and push against kinds of things, you know, to come and bring those new, fresh ideas.
All right. All right. So flipping the question, what advice would you give to aspiring researchers about what not to do? What are some of the most common pitfalls you see in research candidates, people trying to get into the field?
Don't try to act like you just invented something, because more than likely somebody else has done it. So I know what I just said a second ago, where I said come and go do innovative like kinds of things, but also do enough of your research and your homework to know that, oh, they've tried this approach before. They've tried this method before. They've done this before. So I would say do enough of your research, curating knowledge, as we heard this morning. You know, make sure that you do enough of that.
Okay, Johnny?
I think somebody's already spoken about this, but that sort of like weird tribal thing of like, if crapping on other people's work, or like, I'm a Sony guy only. Admit that that's the best console. It's like, nah, like, you know, there's a level of fanboyism that I don't think is professional or appropriate.
Yep.
You know, you want to be able to speak intelligently and clearly and have, I think, useful criticisms of a game, but being the guy who likes to, you know, that piece of garbage, particularly out loud on Twitter, I also find that super gross. Like, we're going to look at your Twitters, by the way. When you apply for a job, I check everything you've ever written, and if any of it is too salty, I don't want you on my team.
LinkedIn, Twitter, anything else. That's how it goes.
Yeah. I'm not saying, like, don't criticize other games. Some people can do it. Some people are better than others, but I wouldn't, don't talk trash. It's not a good look, especially when your job is kind of educated trash talking. If you
retweet.
Yeah. I don't know. Yes.
And I'll extend that a little bit, especially about your own projects. You are, as researchers on projects, you are going to know where all the skeletons are buried. Leave those buried. It is not your job to wave those in front of the world.
That's right.
Right? Be respectful of your team. Keep in mind that you are there to help your team, your company. You are not there to get fake internet points by complaining about stuff or throwing up rants about your team on Reddit or whatever. And we see that happen occasionally, very rarely in the industry, where someone will very publicly leave a games company and like talk crap about their previous employer, not just in research. Actually, I don't think it's ever happened in research, but in other places in the games industry. And those people are like dead. Like, it is going to be very hard for anyone to trust you at that point.
Well, let me ask you a question then. So I know, because professionally that makes sense to do, but think about like some of those hidden things that we see that kind of highlight, oh, that was the problem with them. That's been the issue. That's the culture of that place. So I'm even thinking about like the folks that, I can't think of a good example, but maybe Dead Island. You all remember like the code was like feminist horror kind of code, and you know, kind of like the sexism that was like embedded into like the code of like the game. So that was like a thing that may have not been good for Techland. I don't even know if they're still around anymore. But like, so are there times when it's okay, or is there a way to kind of highlight, like, say, this team is kind of toxic, this is happening? Is there ever an okay time to do that?
I think there's a way. I think it's okay, but there's a way for it. So for that example, talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in games, representation of women. I get that question all the time. Like, do you think the games industry needs to be more diverse? And I'm like, yes, we've been talking about this for years, right? Yeah. But I usually flip it around to like a positive thing about like, here is what you can do to make this more diverse. Or like, this was maybe not the right way to approach it, but here's a better way, or here's good examples to push up what the good are, rather than denigrating people who maybe didn't do as good of a job, right? And most people get the message without you having to, dunk on people.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I think there's also, to the question you're asking, the question of like, what steps did you take ahead of time, right? Like, were you surfacing issues and trying to get them fixed, or is it just like, light everything on fire as you go out the door and nobody ever
calling out and canceling?
Problems?
Yeah,
That's straight up one of my interview questions. Tell me the worst thing about your last research team, and then I don't care what their answer is. The real question is the follow-up of, all right, and how did you try to fix that? And then, I thought you just wanted me to talk trash. Like, no, that's not what we're here for.
Not our job.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think to kind of go back to the original question and what you were saying, it's a matter of like, have you actually thought through your opinions on things, right? Because if you go in and you're just like spouting off about whether it's the previous team, whether it's random games you've played, different console systems, whatever, but haven't really put a whole lot of thought behind it, then like you're not really bringing much to the table. Like, you are in fact demonstrating that you won't bring a whole lot to the table.
And my addition to that is, have you thought about what you want? to go back to Kashana's question about thinking about the industry, a lot of times I'll get requests for informationals that are like, I'd love to talk to you about your career. And I'm like, great, there's so much that I can tell. Like, that could be like a whole day conversation. Do you have specific questions? What is it that you want to know? What do you want to learn more about? So that's my number one advice to, like, if you're reaching out to somebody for an informational, have some specific questions that you might want to ask people.
Okay. All right. So we had some more pre-planned questions. I'm just going to skip those because of time here. So, room, bounce us some questions. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking amongst ourselves.
I'm curious about some of the most impactful workshops you guys have led, if any.
I think everyone here is workshops.
Sorry, no.
So one of the things that folks often ask me to come and give a workshop on is how to do like transformative kind of methods. So like in academia, whenever I was thinking about earlier with the talk that we had, loving that circle. I'm still going back to the talk because it was so amazing. But seeing, the knowledge generation, but also seeing like the action. You don't see a lot of that like in academia, right? Because that's not traditionally the realm of academics, like to change the world, And so I approach it like more from like a feminist methodology, intersectional kind of methodology to improve people's spaces and improve lives online, right? So one of the most I think powerful and impactful workshops that I've given has been on like critical methodologies and how to do this research and how to improve people's experiences online.
Okay. Johnny?
My answer's not as fancy as that.
It's okay.
Essentially, I mean, what I would say is I would break out your question into two things because there are, I think, client or developer-facing workshops that can be very useful in terms of introducing UX thinking and mindsets and doing all that kind of work. And then again, to re-reference Randy's stuff, was the internal-facing workshops where it's really your team facing inwards and sort of navel-gazing and how can you increase your maturity and your impact across the organization. And so both of those are completely different focus, but they can both be ultra impactful in how you are able to work with a team.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the workshops, which was probably not set up as clearly as Randy's presentation was this morning, was just working with some of the teams to kind of walk through like what their development process is, what the questions are they'd really have at the various points in time, and how we could help answer them, and then go back and be like, so now that we could get these answers, but this will take time, and you'll have to actually be able to act on them. Like, what should our development schedule really look like now? And just get them to kind of embrace it into the kind of whole way in which they were making games.
So expand a bit about what kind of stakeholders would be involved in that kind of process at Scopely.
At Scopely in particular, so we're set up a little differently than most of the other like kind of console PC space.
That's why I asked.
For us, so we'd have like the general manager of the game. We'd have the executive producer, who's obviously a big part of scheduling, and kind of the director of roadmap, particularly in those conversations. Sometimes we'd have a game designer, a UX designer. We might have director of performance there, and maybe the studio head from the actual like dev side. But we'd get that kind of leadership team together and just walk through, like I said, what the questions are at the different points in the process, which can be all the way from the beginning of what issues are even there among the player community that we should be trying to fix next, because we have a lot of live services, to like, okay, now we've decided this is kind of the problem, like what really is the extent of that problem space and how does it interact with all the other systems that are there or aren't there, to the obvious like usability side of like, now that we're building this thing, like, does this make sense to players, all the way through to like, once it's out there, what is the feedback, how can we iterate on this, how can we make it better.
Okay.
But there's just questions all along the way, and just making sure that we actually try to build time into like the entire process.
Melissa, workshop?
Yeah, so mine was actually a developer-facing one, internal. I worked on a team, Minecraft Education Edition, where they do lots of classroom observation, which is basically naturalistic observation, which we do as researchers. So I actually led a little workshop on how to do a naturalistic observation, but stripping out all the research language and talking about it just from a human standpoint. Here's how to ask leading questions. Don't tell people, no, you can't do that. Like, give them encouragement, right? And I know that it was one of the most impactful ones I've done because the team members, remember, they passed the document around that I put together, and they actually teach each other or check each other on the questions that they're asking on site or in classrooms as well. So it was like a nice ongoing kind of education I was able to do.
So, Doctor, I want to follow up a little bit there because you said earlier, you said something really interesting to me that was, it's not necessarily your job as an academic to change the world. But I'm not quite sure I agree because I think a lot of that broader impact has to come out of academia, right? Industry is very as we've heard from our panelists, industry is very focused on the product and the idea and what we need for our stakeholders. Absolutely. So I'm wondering if you could expand a bit about how do you have an impact on the broader world there? So the world is your workshop. How do you approach that?
So this is one of the, that's not something that I agree with. That's just something that academia says, right? So when they look at like research and validity of research, triangulation, generalizability, all that kind of stuff. So it's like very scientific and systematic. Of course, we all know that, right? And so they have often said that a lot of the research that is transformative, that they often say that we're too close and too connected to the participants, right? In a way that it's not like rigorous enough, right? So I often get told that I'm too close to the folks online, in Xbox Live, and places wherever they are, in whatever space that they're in. But it's important to have those in-depth like relationships so you can say, hey, what are your needs? What's happening to you in this space? What kinds of conversations do I need to have with stakeholders or with industry folks to say, hey, this is what's happening. They're not filling out those surveys. This is the reason that they didn't do that. So I think having that intimate connection is necessary, but there's a lot of folks like in academia, there are some journals that won't accept like my scholarship, which is fine, because they don't see it as rigorous enough. And there's a term, it's called me-search. So they're saying, hey, you're focusing on all those women of color. You're too connected to that community to be able to have like any kind of like informed assumptions about what's happening. And so I think that's a garbage argument, first off, because I'm
like saying none of us could do research on games because we're all gamers. It's
exactly. No, that's what I said.
You're biased because you're a subject matter expert.
Exactly. So I argue a lot in those academics. That's what I do. And they don't take me seriously at all because I do exactly just that. But I'm with you because like if we're not changing the world or improving lives, then why are we doing it for?
Yeah. And if you can't do that work, then who can?
Right, because ain't nobody else doing it.
And who is?
Exactly. I'm like, okay, I'll stop doing it. You got it.
It's got to be a white dude.
Right?
It's such an absurd. Anyway.
I mean, because let's talk about that right there. Because think about how much cultural knowledge that's happening in these spaces that some folks might not know. It would take a lot of time to understand what it means for somebody to say, whatever black colloquialism or black vernacular or Spanglish or something, you have to be connected to some cultures to understand what's actually happening in those spaces, right? So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I don't.
It's like a worst edition of mansplaining. Culture-splaining? I don't know. I'm sure someone's got a better term than that.
Somebody's got it. We'll find it.
All right. Next question. Question over here.
Mine might be a little too philosophical. So.
You're not a junior.
For this group? No.
It sort of comes off Randy's talk at the beginning, and
that's all we're going to be talking about all day.
That's all, clearly.
Continuous name tag.
Thank you, and sorry.
I know.
It's clear to me now, especially after seeing Randy's talk, but also just all the recent developments in the past couple of years around game user research, that we have really come onto our own as a discipline. Right? We're like large enough. We were large enough to have arguments about methodology. We're now large enough to have arguments around boundaries and disciplinary boundaries, and is UX, UR, and that type of thing. So I think that's all great. We should also pat ourselves on the back for growing large enough to have those kind of conflicts, because it's sort of a sign of you've made it as a discipline. But my father's a mathematician, actually, and so it strikes me that mathematics is a discipline, right, that, to be frank, very, very few people care about. But we all use math, right? And so there's a difference between those two things. And I wonder if, especially when I hear kind of the debates around UX versus UR, I wonder if we are actually going to get to that point where the broader methodologies and tools that we use infiltrate enough other disciplines that the kind of boundary making that we engage in for very practical reasons in the beginning of our discipline in order to differentiate ourselves from designers or from traditional HCI or from academic games researchers will actually be counterproductive. Does that make my question make sense?
I hope that we're already there, like that we look beyond into other disciplines and the methods that they're using. Like I don't see any reason, like my background is as a social psychologist, but I don't see any reason why I should only use social psychological. Like what does that even mean? Like why not use ethnography? Why not use telemetry? Why not go beyond and look at the approaches from other different areas for whatever we need to do in order to capture that magic, right? Like that's what games is about. So like why would we not be able to broaden beyond? And we were talking about that a little bit earlier, even with this conference, even like bring more people in. Like how do we understand different approaches from different folks to get that knowledge from them? So yeah, I think that we should already be there. And if we're not, we should definitely push that forward. Yeah.
There are 2 conferences this week, right? There's a UX conference yesterday and a UR conference today. So essentially my question is, why is there not one conference? Boundary.
I
Like
think
logistically?
I mean, that's a very
Say something to
specific
that.
example that has a very specific
You
set
helped
of
organize
answers,
this.
but
Give us an answer, Joe.
The philosophical answer.
Yeah, not the logistics one. That one's less interesting. GDC don't like us around is not a good answer. So
yeah.
I think something that's happening. I mean, 'cause think about like something that like you nurture from childhood or from birth. You know, you're invested. You're there. You see it grow. And then there's one thing. So I agree and disagree. Maybe like there are folks that come in and could kind of disrupt and distort what you originally created. And so I can see some protectionism of why you would want to, you know, keep your own space and keep that there. But the interdisciplinary like scholar in me is, you know, I got a degree. There's an interdisciplinary degree where I had to draw from new media studies, communication, sociology, criminology. Like I drew from all these different kinds of activism, you know, not even just, you know, I got outside the ivory tower too to see, hey, what's happening like on the ground. So I think that, I don't think they're incompatible though. You know, I think one of the folks like who are rooted in this protectionism really want to ensure that people recognize the groundwork that was laid to create, you know, these different kinds of fields and to create these disciplines. Because you have folks coming in and, you know, think it just began in 2015, you know, think about the timeline. Oh, 2015. This is where it started, without realizing all the groundwork that was laid. So I think it might be some, like, we want some acknowledgement too, and that could like create like some of the divides. I mean, I don't know, I don't have an answer, but that could be part of what's happening.
I also think part of the larger conversation that seems to be coming up more and more often about increasing UX maturity in organizations and growing as a discipline is essentially, in other words, let's break those boundaries, tear down silos. You know, all of my favorite presentations in recent history have been like Yusuf's presentation at gamesUR London, where he gave a presentation about analytics, but every example he had was about analytics working with user research, analytics working with consumer intelligence, you know, that all of us now are starting to see more and more responsibility to branch out from I do usability studies to I work within my organization to improve our entire offering on top of video games, you know, anywhere that our player interacts with our brands, with our everything, we need to be working at improving that because we sort of have that link between our company and the players that we work with. And so melting all that other stuff away and finding better ways to help is, I think, paramount to us growing as an industry.
All right.
Yeah, and part of it might also come down to kind of the breadth of each of the sections of like UX versus user research. So like, to give an example from Scopely, like user research aids basically everyone there in making decision making. But if you flip to like the design side, UX designers have a very specific role that is separate from game designers, that is separate from the PMs, that is separate from everyone else. And so like the Venn diagrams are not one-to-one of like what we cover. And so it's probably important for each to be able to have a spot to talk about like the things that are specific to theirs, if they're actually going to go really in depth on it.
Yeah. Question over here. Oh, question
We
on
actually
the
have
stream?
so let me go ahead and read that. It says, do you think that having a public Twitter in which you discuss UX issues in video games or blogging about games is valuable for someone interested in this field? And would you view this favorably?
The answer is yes. It's at gamesUR. Seb Long runs it. I mean, that sounded like a joke, but no, I'm serious. I mean, you can
I think she meant like, as an individual, is it worthwhile to have your own?
Oh.
Not we as a group. Should we have one that Seb runs? Which is yes. But
I wait
Yeah.
for Seb talking for me. I sound way smarter.
individual. I mean, I think the answer is yes, but make sure you do it properly. Like if you're doing a good job, it's amazing. If you're twittery, it could bite you in the ass.
Yeah, I think Twitter is a hard platform too, because it's, what is it, 140 characters, right? Or is it longer now? I don't know. But it's pretty short, right? So are there other modalities that you can connect it to? Are there longer form articles that you have? Like, I would say yes, but like that can't be the only thing. There's got to be some way to supplement that to show that you have the depth, right?
It's not a great place for nuanced discussion.
Yeah.
No.
So I was going to say no. Like for doing the things that we're talking about, I would absolutely say no. So because anything that we've just said right now could easily open us up to I'll use the word trolls, that people will come in and flood the conversation. They can co-opt an entire hashtag and take over the conversation. So it's not what we originally intended to be. So I think that's just the nature of the platform, right? So it affords different things, but that's one of the things you got to be ready for as well. So you got to be savvy, just as he said, you got to be savvy in your use of it. So I like to slay folks on Twitter, so I love using it. But you got to know how to do it.
So I'm going to plug the Discord as well. Like if you want to have those non-140 character discussions, join us on the Discord.
Yeah, I guess if the point is to show that you're smart and you want to do it in a public-private place, the Discord's a good place for that, where you're not at risk of upsetting somebody necessarily. It's especially if you're in the junior track, people understand that you are making your bones as a baby researcher and you're trying to figure out your voice. That can be a good place to do it and get feedback that is honest and critical from more senior people that isn't just, like you said, 140 characters of salt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a question.
I was promised more arguing. I want to hear a little bit more conflict from you guys.
Look
so
at who
hopefully
we
I can
picked.
try to.
There should have been more arguing.
Hopefully I can get a question to spark that. So I'm just kind of interested in, it's great to plug Randy again. It's great to hear this kind of history look back and then where things are now and hopefully where we're going to keep going. But do you ever envision a land in 2025, 2030 where the term user researcher doesn't quite exist anymore because it's been morphed into other roles so that we are getting so good at our jobs that now designers have a little bit of user research and engineers have a little bit of user research personality so they can start catching a lot of these things that we traditionally research and capture?
Melissa?
No. First of all, because I like my job and I want to keep it, but also because I think as technology develops over time, that there's always going to be new problems. It's our job to kind of, I see our job as researchers is to learn things really fast and then teach it to other people, right? So I feel like as technology develops over time, there will be things that the designers will always miss and that they won't see. But also I think that going back to that comment about as our field grows and morphs and shapes, right? So maybe we won't always be user researchers in the specific sense of looking at UIs or looking, right? But maybe we're thinking about experiences much more generally, about the sort of undefinable magic of what does it mean to actually play a game or have an interactive experience beyond just actual video games, but into all the other kinds of experiences that feed into that. So I don't think so. I think that what we need to do is make sure that we evolve our roles so that we can stay employed, but also to help people understand the changing landscape of games and entertainment.
And so I would like to see, so this is y'all's job. I don't want y'all to lose. I don't want anybody to lose a job, right? But I would like to see more of this, being intentionally embedded into the design and the core, of when an entity, begins whatever it's doing, that it's thinking about these kinds of questions that you all are doing, from jump, right? And not to have this, yes, I'm going to tie back to the morning talk, but I'm think about when the research finally comes into the conversation, oh, this is happening, the reactionary thing, this is happening, where's the research team? Come in, help fix this. If they had done it from jump, then, a lot of the things that we do won't be necessary. But again, you have to ensure that they're applying, ethical concerns and making sure that they're inclusive enough, so that's what we are doing. So I don't see y'all going anywhere anytime soon. I don't.
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different approach while still saying no to your question. I think
we won't fight each other, but we're going to fight you.
We will, yes.
Thanks for arguing.
So I think for me, research is a field that's going to take some expertise to be able to do. And so being oh, my designers will just handle it or my programmers will just handle it is probably not really what's going to happen. But I think what we might see is some of the other fields should kind of collapse into us. So at the end of the day, we should be taking data from all sources and consolidating it into an understanding of what is happening throughout the entire user experience and being able to then help others action off that. And right now there's lots of various teams that can be involved in that, whether it's us or data analytics or, whatever other teams your company happens to have. And I'm not sure it's actually beneficial for people to keep them all separate. So I think at some point user research will be and here is everything we know about the user through all these different means.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to add one bit too, is that garbage research looks like really good research to the untrained to the untrained observer. So if you're in a position where like, oh, my engineer is doing research, they're probably doing really bad research. Like if you're not consulting with an expert, if you don't have legitimate domain expertise in that area, anyone can do research. It's just more likely to be garbage if you don't have someone that's trained in that area.
Can I take a minute to dunk on James and start a fight? No, it's a real question though, I promise. I'm just waiting for the mic. I don't really need it. How are you?
I'm down with this dunking on James thing. This sounds like fun.
Yeah, okay. So to follow on to both of these questions, a little bit Morgan's and a little bit yours. We're a bit cute about our discipline, though, right? Like we are. Like I mean, and I mean this. I mean, I'm a guy with a PhD. I've got alphabets after my name. Like we're a bit self-aggrandizing, right? There are some things we do that are really quite simple, and I mean that. And I'm not trying to put us down, but there are things we do that are brain dead simple at the base level. But I feel like to some degree we are a bit protectionistic about our own work. I mean, I do data analytics, and we don't like when other people do that. This is a bit bizarre, and I think it's maybe, and I want to get your opinions on this. I think it's a sign of our discipline growing up. You know, I was in an engineering role before, and if a designer came to me and said, no, you don't need to do this scripting. I've already programmed it and it works. My knee jerk would be, sweet Jesus, this is great. Whereas here we'd be a bit like, you touched my toy. And we kind of, we play that game a lot. And I want to get your perspective on that. Like, should we be teaching designers and sound designers and artists and engineers to be doing these things from the get-go for themselves and assisting and validating and training and spreading research? Or should we be keeping it kind of like, no, you wouldn't understand, which is kind of how I tend to view it. But anyway, sorry, that's the long not question. I'm trying to start a fight too. I need one of these times.
And then I agree with them. I'm sorry, because I think he's absolutely right. So in my approach, you know, it's like feminist methodology, intersectional methodology. I empower the folks that most people will call subjects or participants. You know, they're the co-narrators in knowledge production. Like, it's not me that has the information, it's them that has the information. So there's like this back and forth kind of relationship, you know, with both of us that's empowering them to do the thing that I spent a whole bunch of money to get this PhD to do. I'm like, hey, I don't have to have it because it's elitist. At the end of the day, you have to think about what the pursuits that we're doing is actually very elitist. We know this, I know this, you don't. We're the, you know, so I agree with you. I know we're supposed to be arguing. I don't want to argue with you because you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
What?
Someone else? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, somebody this morning, who I won't name check for the 80th time, mentioned the importance of, you know, what do you do if people are using your data wrong? And it's about growth, right? Like, part of this is growing up and teaching people and educating others. But it is dead simple, but there is a time-consuming element to it. There is a subject matter expertise, and even I think part of it is it also looks really simple. So you sit in a room and you watch a guy play video games. Like, what do you even? And it's like, well, no, I happen to know a lot about watching people play video games, and so it feels simple. I think one of my colleagues, Walker, put it nicely. It's simple versus complicated, or simple versus. I'm getting it wrong, but it was an eloquent way of saying, like, just because something. Just because you can grok it doesn't mean it's easy to do. He mentioned losing weight. Like, everybody knows how to lose weight, but like, I can't really do it. And so I think that there's an element to that about user research where you see a bunch of people sitting in a room and filling out a form. It's like,
To be clear, I'm in certain methodologies.
Sure, but still, I mean, there is still a subject matter expertise that is important to make sure that it's spreading, but owning it and jealously guarding it from others, I think, is the wrong path forward for all of us. That sharing this knowledge and, pushing, once you have like heuristics like Seb talks about and getting those out into designers' hands, the UI trap cards, those things, and then, I mean, basically for us, it just lets us elevate our work, right? Because now we're not spending the first 6 months of integrating with a team, grabbing low-hanging fruit continuously off the tree. We can start from a place of like, all right, now let's do the really cool, really interesting stuff. But all of it still needs to happen at some point, whether we're doing it or they're doing it.
Yeah. That's why my answer to Lauren's question started out as like, no, but then ended up being more like, are we done? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. I'll finish it really quickly. I do agree. Yes, teaching the low level stuff so that we can do the up level. Because I've noticed, like, once they know how to ask the questions and survey stuff, it's coming back to me and helping them put it together and interpret.
Yeah. Sharing results, not necessarily methodology.
Right.
All right. So that's it. That is it for time. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Feel free to grab any of us.
45 minutes?
Yeah.
Wow.
So feel free to grab
That's
any
what
of
I said.
us, or people with the Ask, is it AMA? Is that what the badge looks like?
Yep.
The AMA. Feel free to ask anyone with a blue badge. Fire these questions at them as well. This day is all about knowledge sharing. Please continue to do that. Join us in the Discord. Thank you for your time.
Hi, everyone.
Check, check, check. 1, 2.
All right. Test, test. Nope. Totally not working. Nope. Test, test. Nothing.
All right.
Hey, hey, hey.
And they wanted like just when they switch mentors.
Hey, 2.
All right. Well, I guess. Mentors. Thank you. Please rotate mentors.
Mentors, it is time to rotate so you can make it to your next talk. Please rotate. Please rotate. Please rotate. Everyone, it is now 1:55, so we had to conclude the session and move on to the next talk. So, as you're leaving, can you please help us turn the chairs to face the front again? Okay. Is Harvey Owen in here? Nope.